Hi, everyone. This is Unleashed with Scarlett Johnson, presented by Moms for Liberty. Today's conversation sits right at the intersection of science, education, and culture. It's about something foundational, something every human being lives with every day, and yet something that our institutions increasingly tells us to not notice, to not name, and to not question. It's biological sex. Until 5 minutes ago, we knew the definition of sex. We knew it to be a binary. But recently, and to the surprise of many like myself, we discovered that reality was being erased. So today we're going to discuss what it is, why it matters, and why pretending it's unknowable doesn't make us more compassionate, just makes us less honest. I'm joined today by my guest who is doing the increasingly rare work of explaining reality clearly, carefully, and without apology, even to young children, by providing materials that they can use in classrooms. Zachary Elliott is a science educator who has studied the biology of sex since 2017. He's the author of 4 books based on sex differences, built on deep dives into the scientific literature and informed collaboration with medical doctors, biologists, and experts. Zach has a gift for translating complex research into explanations that everyday parents, teachers, and policymakers can actually understand. So thank you for joining me today. Your wife, Cynthia, could not be here. She's not feeling well, but y'all are going to record a speech that I saw you give in person and that I was really impressed by. But you both are the folks behind the Paradox Institute, which is a nonprofit dedicated to educating the public on the biology of male and female. And as gave me this information, Paradox creates animated videos, books, and interactive curriculum designed to make real science engaging, accessible, and age appropriate, which is wonderful. So Zach, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So biological sex, what is it? I think we know, but you can, why does it matter? And why does pretending that it's unknowable cause harm?
So sex is the fundamental biological system through which our species reproduces. And just like all other species out there, most species reproduce sexually. And when it comes to sex, we are either male or female. We develop down either a male or female pathway in utero, and that is determined by our genetics. So our genes decide whether we develop down the male pathway or the female pathway. And defining sex is fairly simple. It's just whether your body is organized around the production and utilization of eggs for a female or the production and utilization of sperm, being a male. So it's really about the organization of the body with respect to gametes. And there are, of course, disorders or people who don't presently produce gametes, but your bodies still develop around one of those 2 roles, either sperm production or egg production. So it's really that simple. People love to complicate it, but that is, it's very simple. And then when it comes to why it's important, well, sex impacts our anatomy, it impacts our physiology, it impacts our disease risk, it impacts our even physical advantages like things like sports, very different physiologies. And so everything that is important in life is oftentimes impacted by sex. And so it's important that people recognize it. If you don't recognize it, if you think that it doesn't exist, you're going to believe in many, many different falsehoods that are very harmful on your body, on children. You're not able to lead people. You're not able to parent. You're not able to have even acceptance of yourself, right? And so it's a fundamental reality that denying it really costs both adults and children many things, from their healthcare to even their lives sometimes.
So what I have seen in testifying and talking, so for me, going to Madison, Wisconsin and testifying, and what I've seen in video of other other parents, even doctors, when they go to testify about this subject in defense of biological reality. Lots of times what we used to hear is that, well, there's a difference between sex and gender. Now, more recently and predictably, they aren't even going that far. They'll say sex doesn't exist. They are now even erasing that.
Mhm.
But in more conservative areas, maybe more conservative states, even before the US Supreme Court just last week, Tuesday, in order to obfuscate their position and make it more palatable, they still go back to saying, well, let's let's not let's not talk about sex. Let's not
Mhm.
define sex because it's gets murky for them. Although they try and throw in that intersex thing every once in a while. They'll say,
Mhm.
let's talk about gender identity. If you could talk about these things, because this is where regular people that don't do
Mhm.
deep dives on this can get trapped into bad arguments. First,
Yeah.
first they'll say, "Well, let's not talk about sex. Let's talk about gender." But even now, they're going so far as to say, "Well, sex doesn't exist. It's
Mhm.
that's just old school thinking."
Yeah, the lawyer at the Supreme Court, the ACLU lawyer, she was saying that we don't have a definition for the court. And it ironically, it does undermine their position if they can't define what they're talking about. They can't protect what they claim to want to protect. But when it comes to, I guess, do you want me to give maybe the background of gender identity and where it
Yes.
came from? And yeah,
Yes.
so gender identity really comes up in the 20s, 30s, 40s when it comes to sexologists. So sexologists were really interested in these males, transsexuals who who believed they were women or who wanted to be women, and they were coming up with this term to describe these males' experiences, and they were very interested in seeing how they could alleviate these males' discomfort in their sex, and also alleviate basically the fetish that they were experiencing by one, giving them hormones, doing surgery, making them try to appear more like women or try to mimic women. And so the term gender identity really exploded in the 60s with Dr. John Money, who was a sexologist. And he did incredibly horrifying experiments on boys and girls. There was a famous case where a boy, he had a botched circumcision, and so they decided to fashion his genitalia to appear like a vagina. Dr. Money did, and he was like, "This is a great example or great case to use for saying that sex is socially constructed. That we can just raise this boy really as a girl, actually, and he'll do just fine." And they went forward and did that, and he had an incredible discomfort and trauma with not only his body, but also what Dr. John Money did by doing all these experiments on him and even trying to mimic even sexual behavior with him as a child. And so he was trying to push this idea that gender identity is basically directly tied with sex, and that gender identity actually supersedes sex, and that we can just mold people as they see fit. And so gender identity really grew out from those experiments by sexologists. And
But that
yeah.
wasn't popular or well known.
Mhm.
That was sort of obscure, but
Mhm.
it started to provide, uh, I mean, because we hear about like Judith Butler and certain
Yeah.
activists that used that information in order to develop a some new critical theories that are rooted in
Mhm.
Marxism and meant to destabilize humans. Is there
Yes.
any quick insight you could provide into
Yeah,
that?
so Judith Butler popularized queer theory and is often seen as like the mother of queer theory, where in the 1980s she wrote, and also the 90s, she wrote a couple of books where she was saying that, building on these ideas from the sexologists and the idea that sex is socially constructed, she was claiming that sex itself is socially constructed. It's something that humans have basically come up with to oppress people, to enforce categories on people. And then she said that gender is something that while we perform it in the sense of we're trying to align with social expectations and dress a certain way and behave a certain way, it's ultimately a performance, she said. But ultimately, gender, weirdly enough, is more concrete and more real than sex. So she flipped it, right? So oftentimes you'll see the radical feminist side who are pro sex in terms of recognizing that males and females exist. The radical feminists will say that, oh, gender itself is socially constructed. It's the roles that are constructed. It's the behaviors and all of that are constructed, but sex is real. So these queer feminists, the queer theorists, they claim the opposite, that gender is something that's real. It's something that's even though it's performative, it's fundamental and real. And then sex is something that's socially constructed. So they flipped it around. And so that's what you see with activists today. They are claiming that sex is something that's socially constructed, and gender identity is actually what replaces sex. It is more real than sex. And so you'll see things like, even I saw years ago in the New York human rights documents, that they said that gender identity is the ultimate determinant of one's sex. And there's even a popular paper going back a couple of years in Nature magazine where they were arguing that sex is not only is it not binary, but they said that sex, the primary determinant of sex is gender identity. So even science magazines are arguing that gender identity determines sex. And there's various motivations for that, but that's what's happening. They're undermining sex with gender identity.
To the point that a medical doctor can go before the Senate, as happened last week with Senator Josh Hawley, and when advocating for the abortion pill, claiming I'm the expert, you should listen to medical doctors, the expert. And the simple question was asked, can men get pregnant? And she just refused to answer. She would not answer because in her worldview, sure, men can get pregnant because there's no such thing as male and female. And so if there's a female who identifies as a male and that female gets pregnant, well, in her mind, that's a man who is pregnant. And that disassociation from reality, it's hard to watch. I mean, it went viral and everyone's making fun of this, as was I. It's just insane. But the reality is she is a medical doctor who graduated from a very, very esteemed institution. And she reflects the view of the majority of medical doctors, at least what they have to say, maybe not what they would say privately, but what they sort of have to repeat is men can get pregnant, that sex isn't real or binary. That seems very dangerous in medicine.
Yeah, absolutely. I even have a friend who is going through med school, and they're pushing that on him even in a red state. And it is
Yeah.
very damaging in medicine. So if you are going to ignore somebody's sex, or let's say the documents that they have are inaccurate. So somebody comes into the emergency room, they're a female, let's say, with incredible abdominal pain, for example, but their documents say that they're male. And it's not necessarily, the doctor is not necessarily going to be questioning whether someone is male or female right away, unless maybe it's obvious. But let's say in this case it's not obvious, in the sense of just from external appearance, alone. And so he looks at the documents. Okay, we're dealing with a male, right? So that informs how he diagnoses and treats whatever issue is happening. So there have been real cases where females who identify as males have gone into emergency rooms with abdominal pain, and they actually either have some, like, let's say an ectopic pregnancy where it's a medical emergency that can actually kill them. And so some of them have actually died because of things like that, because their documents are not accurate. They're lying on their documents, and the state allows them to lie on their documents, in some of those cases. And so that actually can kill people when their sex is not accurately recorded and not recognized. And then there's also things that are not necessarily emergencies, but things like disease risk and drug interactions. So medical research has to research both males and females because males and females have different reactions to drugs on a population level. We have different disease risk on a population level. And that's due to, one, our genetics, which are different. We have about 6,500 genes which express themselves differently. Even though they're the same genes in males and females, those genes express themselves differently. And we also have different levels of sex hormones, of course. And so that organizes our body across development since we're in the womb and makes those interactions with disease and drugs very, very different.
That's what I would say. So if sex isn't real and if men can get pregnant, then why on medical records even say what was your sex assigned at birth if it doesn't matter? Because that's what they'll put, sex assigned at birth.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, the fact that they have to include that, what was your sex assigned at birth, what do you identify now, means that they really need to know, like, are you a boy or a girl? Because medically, we have to treat you, and there comes a point where we can't pretend anymore, and we actually need to know your biology because that will inform the way that we treat you. So that's just something they can't escape. If they ever do get to a point where you can just say, I'm born a female and I identify as a male, and the born a female part is completely erased, and you go into an ER and you're not conscious and there's no one there,
Mm-hmm.
and you're presenting as a male, your initial care, unless they rip off your pants or
Mm-hmm.
something and really look, your initial care could be so disastrous that, like you said, it's fatal.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you
And
go
the
ahead.
irony is too, the irony is when they have a trans identity, let's say they're identifying as trans, that identity classification only works in relationship to sex, because they're ultimately saying, I am quote unquote transitioning, or I have transitioned, quote unquote. And that's in reference to what sex they quote unquote were in their minds, right? Even though they still are that sex, they're still referencing their original sex. And medical papers and all of that, when they're talking about this issue, they always have to still say either sex assigned at birth or they're referencing male to female or female to male, right? So they're always referencing what sex they actually are. And that's the irony. They can't actually get away from sex as much as they try. And they certainly can't get away from it in their bodies as well, in how medicine treats them.
But the issue, I think the early, what we'd say, transvestites, drag queens, they predominantly were male, like male who were uncomfortable in their body. It was classified as a mental disorder and treated as such. And so that was a different thing. They weren't trying to say, I am a woman. They would call themselves, cross-dressers, different terms, but they would not try to say, yes, I am a woman. So the change that we have seen recently is that there are increasingly girls who are identifying as male. I know that Abigail Schreier talks about this really surge in this identity that began, I think she points to 2015, 2016, where there's just a real surge. And then that even younger males now are starting to go down this path. So increase in young children and in females, where this was almost exclusively a male phenomenon. And so what do you say to that, those trends? And I know that some of those trends are changing because of the activism and the work that I think that we are doing, and making people aware of what's happening, parents aware of what's happening in classrooms, so that they're fighting back. But what do you say to that sort of shift?
Because this has been popularized so much in the culture, when it comes to targeting, now the culture has shifted towards targeting children, targeting teens, with trying to push gender identity onto them as a way to escape their either trauma, their discomfort with their bodies, with various other issues that they might have. So um, it's in contrast to the older male transsexuals, where in this case you're dealing with more of a primary social contagion, where these, let's say, teenage girls, very uncomfortable with their bodies, which is a normal thing during puberty, especially for girls. And so they are being told that this is a way to escape their discomfort with their bodies. And the culture definitely pushes the idea that females are underdeveloped males in many ways, that females should just be like males, and it's better to be a male because in some sense maybe you'll get less attention, right? Less attention about your looks and things like that. So there's various cultural things that really push these uh, these females who are uncomfortable with their bodies going through puberty down a trans route, because it's seen as a way to escape whatever issues that they're having. And that's how it's marketed to them, that you'll have this ideal body that you've always wanted, and you'll have no discomfort anymore, and so all these different lies, right? But when they actually go down that route and they're taking cross-sex hormones, or they're getting surgeries on their breasts or genitalia, like it really permanently, one, disrupts their endocrine systems, and it destroys their bodies. It just mutilates their bodies. And so going forward, they realize that, wow, I went too far. I was lied to. Many of them realize that. So
Mhm.
it absolutely is a social contagion. And we've seen about a 4,000 to 5,000% increase, for example, in the UK, with uh, females specifically who are teens going into gender clinics. 4,000 to 5,000% increase. So yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah, that's horrifying. And is that so? Shifting to what you do with the Paradox Institute, are some of these things that we're discussing, is that the reason behind um, your founding the Paradox Institute and creating these materials? Can you tell a little bit of your why?
hmm Yeah, so it was really back in 2016, 2017, I was super fascinated with why the culture was denying sex, why they believed that there are no differences between men and women. I was watching people like James Damore, who is a famous software engineer at Google, who circulated this memo about the differences between men and women, and why that's important to recognize, so that we can even increase the amount of women in the coding sector at Google, because understanding those average differences can really help you. And so he laid out a very good case internally at Google, and it was leaked, and then he was fired from Google, for, I guess they were saying that he was discriminating against women, for example, but he was not. He was actually trying to help, just understanding those average differences, right? So I was super fascinated with that, and I wound up just reading and reading and reading the scientific literature, and I was actually in architecture school at the time, and I was devoting my side time to just reading the biology literature, reading the genetics and psychology literature on males and females. And so I wound up synthesizing all that and writing a short book called Sex Differences: A Land of Confusion. And then going into 2020, I wanted to expand on that book. And so then I started consulting with biologists and medical doctors, and I wrote The Gender Paradox, which is a much bigger book on that subject, on just the differences between men and women and where the social construction ideology comes from. And then in 2020, I founded the Paradox Institute, and the goal was to make scientific evidence in the biology of male and female visually powerful and engaging and accessible. And so I used my background in design and my skills with animation, and I started making animated videos on the biology of male and female, like why sex is binary, looking at the differences between males and females in sports, for example, and going through working with biologists, medical doctors, that they would review my work and everything, and it just exploded from there. So I would get tens of thousands of views on the videos in 2020, and it was just incredibly fulfilling to be helping people, teaching them the biology of male and female, and in a very accessible, visually powerful way. And that's not something that I've seen done anywhere else, especially when it comes to presenting the scientific research directly to the viewer, saying, this is what the science says, go see these papers, and also making it, like I said, visually powerful. So that's how we got our start. And then I met my wife, Cynthia, actually on X doing this very thing. And so we met, and then I brought her on, and she wound up expanding it as well with hiring or some volunteer writers, and we have expanded it into tons of articles. We made this pamphlet project, which is the myths of quote unquote gender affirming care, which goes through and shows why gender affirming care, quote unquote, which is sex rejecting procedures, is harmful. And so we ordered, through fundraising, we were able to order 20,000 of these pamphlets, and we distributed them to hospitals, clinics, parents, educators, and all these groups. They actually came to us and ordered these pamphlets, so we were able to just ship them to these groups, and so it's been a huge success.
It is. I'll have to say, so this is great. This is great if you, for a parent going to a school board meeting, going to testify, just to have these facts easy at their fingertips when they're talking to people. To sometimes you'll say something like, there's just been this huge increase, and maybe someone will say, well, prove it. How much? Well, you can say, look, there's a 5,337% increase, and here you go, and here's the statistic. And it's just those quick facts
There's
that
also a
can
QR
help
code
you.
as well, where you can scan the QR code and it takes you directly to the website where all the scientific sources are. So we have the text of the
That's
pamphlet
great.
on the site, and then each claim has an in-text citation to a scientific paper that you can explore. So we didn't want to bog down the actual pamphlet with citations, but we do have that,
You're
QR
smart.
code that takes you to the, yep.
And that's what's great about the QR code, because then here's a pamphlet, scan on this. If you, well, I want proof. Well, here is the proof. And especially the research done in the UK, why, and explain to those watching why the UK has so much more data than we do here in the United States.
I think it's partially because the NHS, which is their national healthcare system, they had their Tavistock clinic, I think, which is the main gender clinic that saw these patients. They have a lot of that data really integrated into their federal system. So it's all one federal system. And for the most part, where in the States, it's so fragmented
Because
into
they have
individual states.
government-run healthcare. So
Mhm.
they are ahead of us. They
Mhm.
more progressive. They started to treat so-called gender dysphoria 20 years ago. So they've
Mhm.
been doing it longer. And because most healthcare is funded by the government, and it's in one place, they have all that data more centralized, where we have a much more bifurcated system of quasi private, quasi public, and we have not been doing these procedures. And I appreciate that Robert Kennedy Jr., the Secretary of HHS now, refers to this as sex rejecting care. I prefer that far before gender affirming care, because this is about rejecting your biological sex. We are only now really looking into the studies, and I'm sure you were watching his conference where I forget, it was Dr. Oz or Dr. McCleary, I don't know if I'm saying his name right, who noted that the research done and provided under the Biden administration was inaccurate, or the research wasn't even published, because it actually proved our point that
Mhm.
there is no good reason, there's no scientific reason based in medicine to affirm a child who's suffering through gender dysphoria.
Yeah, sometimes scientific papers in that situation, if they go against a political narrative, they're not even published. So you don't even see the results, right? So the results you are seeing publicly don't even capture the full picture, right? Especially when it comes to negative results where they're being hidden. So
Mhm.
that's absolutely. And when you see the common pattern with the quote unquote scientific evidence for transitioning either children or even adults, the most evidence that they use, oftentimes it's self-report follow-up. So short-term follow-up,
Mhm.
seeing, hey, are you happy with the results of this? And of course, many times they'll say yes, because oftentimes there's a sense of euphoria when you get the
Yes.
hormones or the surgery at first, right? Um, but that doesn't last. And so when it comes to longer term follow-up studies that have been done, one, the suicidality rate of the adults does not change. It stays around the same before and after a transition. And then also when it comes to the effects on the body and also their mental health does decline and their body's health does decline because of the use of cross-sex hormones and also the effects of the surgeries. You're doing surgeries on the genitalia, for example, where you're not giving them the opposite sex genitalia. You're just fashioning the tissue in a certain way that tries to appear like the opposite sex genitalia,
Yes.
but you're causing all these profound and permanent sexual function issues, urination issues, all of these things, right? Because you're just forming the tissue in a certain way. You're not actually causing the tissue to differentiate down the opposite sex pathway. You're not doing any of that. So it's basically plastic surgery, cosmetic surgery, and it's not doing anything functional. And so all of that put together, the scientific evidence is not good for it at all. The scientific evidence at most is weak in the sense of the only evidence that they really do have as quote unquote positive is just those short-term self-reports, and those aren't what would you say, like, reliable.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we often talk about the social transitioning, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones. Then you get to this surgery and talk about top surgery um, for women, for girls, removal of breasts, and it's in such a way that they want to appear masculine. So that removal is so profound that there's not the possibility, if they detransition, as was the case with Chloe Cole, that they can have breasts fashioned. There is, it's done. They have so thoroughly removed all breast tissue and e- everything, that
Mhm.
they can't just go back and have that reversed. That was a very sad fact that was revealed in testimony that
Mhm.
I heard about 2 years ago when the WPATH files were released, and the doctors who performed this sex rejecting care and surgery said that they even struggled with the fact that after performing surgeries, they would have these teens and young adults come back and say, I've changed my mind. I would like to get my breasts back on. And they didn't fully understand that that was no longer possible, that they
Mhm.
couldn't do
Yeah.
that. And, but that just shows how mentally unprepared they were to make such a hefty,
Yeah.
lifelong, life altering decision.
Yeah.
I rarely even discuss bottom surgery because it's so horrific. It's
Mhm.
so barbaric that I can't even believe that there exist surgeons
Mhm.
and doctors in the free world that will perform these surgeries.
Mhm.
It's so awful.
Yeah, that was something that when Cynthia has my wife Cynthia, she when she was growing up, she had some distress around her sexed body, partially due to her family. But when it comes to when she was growing up and stuff, she discovered the transgenderism and kind of the media in terms of showcasing some adults who were trans. And she looked into actually the surgery aspect because she was interested in plastic surgery. And when she saw the actual surgeries, she was like, "Oh no, I that is not something like," and it really like shows you what's actually going on, right? So she had a awakening of like, wow, this is actually what this is. It's
Yeah,
not it's not what people claim it is.
yeah.
And so yeah, they're lying to these adults, then they're also lying to the children, and the children cannot consent because when you're a child, even a teenager, you can't look ahead in terms of like what you want reproductively. You're not
Yes.
even sure what you want to do with your job, right? With your career. There's no way you can adequately be informed as to like what's going to happen or what you actually want. And even as an adult, they're not even being informed either of like what the real
Yeah.
ramifications of these procedures are. So yeah, it's horrific. It really is.
And I'm not sure if people watching know that there are young women that once they turn 18, they'll request full hysterectomies. They will have their tubes tied and burned like tubal ligations so that they can never have children. And they're making these decisions at such young ages that I can only venture to guess, and I think it would be a very educated guess, that will come a point in their life where they will regret that decision. And as someone that has family members that are in the medical field at all levels, surgeons, doctors, nurses, there was a point, even 20 years ago, where would be considered one of the ethical questions asked of medical students before they were graduated and they take ethics classes. They would be provided scenarios where a 24-year-old woman would ask for a complete hysterectomy. And in that context, the doctors were to learn how they should not do such a thing, that would be questionable, that would be causing harm, that you would need to like have her explore the reasoning behind that request, and you would not do that. Like it just crossed ethical boundaries. Now, I believe that there are surgeons that would do such a thing because if a female said, I am a male, I was assigned female at birth, but really a male, and I don't even want to have ovaries or a uterus. Like that's the scale of the mental illness. They just want everything that's feminine ripped out of them. And instead of getting I think the mental health care that these girls need, their sex rejection is being affirmed and paid for with tax dollars or
Yeah.
subsidized with insurance. That means that what I pay in my insurance, is going to cover these horrific surgeries. And under
And
the
the
Biden
coding
administration,
is
yeah,
very interesting. Like when
that's
they code for how to bill the insurance companies, they're coding not for gender dysphoria or distress around sex. When they are billing those procedures to insurance, the doctors are coding it under unspecified endocrine disorder, basically. So they're often claiming that this is just a unspecified endocrine disorder, and so they needed hormones and surgery. Um, and so it makes, the insurance companies think that, oh, it's just like some male or female who has like an endocrine disorder and they just need, treatment, right? But that's not what it is, right? They're claiming that that in a sense that they were born in the wrong body and have the wrong hormones and the wrong anatomy and need to be fixed. And yeah, so that's absolutely one crazy part of it, which is they're actually lying on the insurance billing as well. And so that's something that is being looked at on a federal level, which is really good.
yes.
Yeah.
Under the Trump administration, there's a lot of the issues we're discussing that are under scrutiny. The department, HHS, NIH, they are withholding funding from states, Medicaid funding. They're attempting to do so. Medicaid, Medicare funding states that perform sex rejecting surgeries. If you're a hospital that is performing such surgeries, then they've just put December 18th, I believe it was. They said that we're going to withhold that federal funding if you participate in this sort of sex rejecting care for minors. So that will have a big impact. I'm sure there's going to be legal challenges, but it's sending the message. And I think it's being heard loud and clear because there are hospitals across the country that are at least claiming that they are not performing such surgeries or providing such care. But as we know, you and I both had lengthy conversations with Dr. Eaton Heim, and we know that even in the red state of Texas, when Texas Children's Hospital claimed that they were not providing this gender affirming or sex rejecting care to minors, that's what they put out publicly. But behind the scenes, they were still going strong and
Yeah.
actually increasing the
Yeah.
patient's load. And he revealed that and
Yeah.
nearly had to spend some time in jail for his bravery in being a whistleblower.
It's hard to basically think about how absurd this entire situation is because if you take any person who has any other type of mental illness, such as they think that their limb needs to be cut off or anything else needs to be changed on their body that's actually just a healthy body part, the doctors wouldn't say, "Oh, sure, we'll cut off your limb, we'll cut off your leg to help you alleviate your body dysmorphia, for example, or whatever it is." Um, Doctors don't treat patients like that. They send them to a psychologist or psychiatrist to deal with their mental health issues. But here, for some reason, it's treated differently. It's treated we're going to just take off your body parts, even though they're healthy. We're going to try to alleviate your psychological distress with cosmetic surgery, and that's never good, especially when that surgery and the cross-sex hormones, really harm the person's body.
So, with the time we have, I would like to discuss first. Tomorrow, you are going to go to Indiana to testify as an expert on a subject that I think is really important because there is legislation like this all across America in different states. I know that it was introduced here in Wisconsin. It's legislation regarding birth certificates and the ability to alter a birth certificate to reflect gender identity rather than your biological sex. And I would also like to talk about what the materials that you provide for classrooms and for schools. So let's start with the first.
Yeah. So with those laws, so right now in a lot of states, like you said, you can change your uh, sex designation on your birth certificate to mean opposite of the opposite sex of what you actually are, right? And so there's these laws that are being passed now to protect birth certificates and make sure they're accurate. And so the law basically defines sex in the same way that I defined it at the beginning. So the organization of the body around sperm or eggs. And it also accounts for disorders and things like that. But when it comes to that, it ensures that one, when you're born, you have accurate designation of your birth certificate. It also bans the ability to change your birth certificate to be the opposite sex. So, a male can't say that I'm a female and I'm going to put female on my birth certificate. So that is no longer allowed. So birth certificates have to be accurate because one, we have to track accurate public health data, accurate crime data. We have to also make sure that when you're, at a hospital, that the hospital has accurate records to be able to treat you accurately and safely. And when it comes to even people who have disorders of sex development, where they have a congenital anomaly in their reproductive system, they require sex-specific care. So it's paramount for doctors to know their sex as well. So, for example, you might have a person who has XXY chromosomes instead of just XY. So that's a common disorder called Klinefelter syndrome, and it's male specific. So they develop down the male pathway and everything, but they have oftentimes lower testosterone because their testes don't work as well. And so they need sex specific treatment for that. And so sex designations on birth certificates, even in cases of disorder, are really important. And this law,
Real quick, just to interject on that subject, because sometimes people will say that these like rare anomalies prove that not everyone just has XX or XY. What you're saying is that even with that disorder, the person is a biological male, and they just need they might need some treatment in order to make sure that they develop fully so into adulthood. That doesn't it's like if I'm born with 9 fingers, that doesn't mean that you would say all humans have 10 fingers. Just because one child is born with 9 fingers doesn't negate that fact.
Or like a heart defect. If you have a heart defect, for example, that doesn't mean that you don't have a heart. It's just that your heart is disordered, right? It needs help functioning. And so the same thing occurs in these conditions where these males or females develop with reproductive systems that might be underdeveloped, right? So their external genitals maybe don't develop fully. Their gonads might be under functioning. And they might have unusual sex chromosome combinations, like the example I gave. So, but in those cases, the genetics that are within those chromosomes still develop them down the male or female pathway. And so knowing that is paramount to actually treat them. And so there are some cases where, for example, you might have an infant who is misclassified at birth, and these are pretty rare. But a situation where, let's say, you have a male who develops testes and everything, except there's something that causes his external genitalia to be underdeveloped. So it might be difficult for the doctors to just look at him externally when he's born and determine whether he's a male or female just by his external genitalia alone. So sometimes these males are classified as females at birth. And this disorder, you can look it up, it's called 5-ARD. And so that is a situation where it's important for the person to be able to change their birth certificate to accurately reflect their sex.
Okay.
So they might grow up through puberty, and that in that case, they actually start to masculinize because of the surge in testosterone from their testes. And so their external genitalia will actually start to masculinize. The penis will become more obvious. For example, the scrotum will actually grow. Their testes may descend further. And so that condition, 5-ARD, they often need to be able to change their birth certificate to be like, hey, okay, I realize now that I'm actually a male. I've been medically verified by medical doctors showing that I have this disorder, 5-ARD, and I need to change my birth certificate to reflect that.
With that disorder, would they be able to see their reproductive organs, whether they had that they don't have ovaries or a uterus?
Right. So, for example, oftentimes their testes are kind of in the abdomen or like right below, like in the pubic area, the testes are. And so doctors would, let's say the testes are still there, the doctors would do like an ultrasound, for example. They would be able to see that, okay, these are testes. They would also be able to do genetic analysis to see, okay, this person has XY chromosomes. So this is pointing us to a disorder of sex development.
Yes.
And then they would do further genetic analysis. They would see that, oh, he's missing this enzyme that helps produce DHT for his external genitals. Okay, so now we diagnose him with 5-ARD, and we can objectively determine that.
Yeah, they wouldn't say, well, it's a mystery, let's wait and see.
Right.
These are all things that can be knowable, especially now with modern medicine, where very quickly you can learn that while the external genitalia is not quite there, that internally, this is a biological
Right.
male. And correct me if I'm wrong, I know I'm not wrong on this, but that in our DNA, because our biological sex when is that determined? Because they'll say assigned. When is your biological sex determined according to real science?
So the simplest way to think about it is that your sex is determined at conception when you inherit a specific gene profile from your parents. And that gene profile, around the 6th week after conception, that gene profile initiates the genetic program that then takes your gonads down either the male or female path. So you can say primarily that sex is determined at conception, and then it develops starting around the 6th week in terms of your gonads, and then eventually your genitalia.
Thank you for clarifying that, because sometimes you could say something like sex is determined at conception, and then you'll hear someone say, well, they'll try and be very cute and, well, you can't tell by the external genitalia until 6 weeks. But
Right.
what you're saying is that's just the part of the function that it's built into your DNA. And is it not every cell in your body basically will classify you as a male or female? If they dug up my bones 100 years from now, what would they would they could tell
Yeah.
just by doing genetic testing, I am a female. It doesn't matter what
Mhm.
what I what I thought I was.
Mhm.
I am a female. There's just no other way around it. This is a fact. And it's so
Yeah.
frustrating to me to be told, "Oh no, no, that's not true."
Yeah, the sex development cascade, when those genes fire around the 6th week and they start to differentiate your neutral gonad into testes or ovaries, and then the hormones from there go through and differentiate your genitalia. So that sex development cascade, it organizes your entire body in the womb, and then as you develop through childhood and puberty, you're further organized and specialized down that sex pathway. And so yeah, like you said, it affects even your bones, the architecture of your bones. So anthropologists can determine sex just by looking at the pelvis and the skull and things like that with almost 100% accuracy, because of that crazy level of sexual dimorphism in the skeleton, and how that is impacted over time by sex hormones and by genetics. So that's something that's built into us, and we cannot change that.
So recently, and this is anecdotal, but I know that anyone with children can relate to this. So there's my grandson, 2 years old, and then another little girl, and there's a little baby doll. And at first, he picks it up and he's like, "Oh, baby," and we're like, "Oh, it's so cute. Look at him." And then he takes the baby and he starts,
And
you know,
bang it.
hanging it and running a car over it, and the little girl starts crying and then holding it like, "No, baby, no." And of course, we said, "Don't do that to the baby." And then
Mhm.
he's like, "Sorry, baby." And then, like, kinda starts it's just the difference. I have had 5 kids. I've been in
Mhm.
classrooms. I have nieces, nephews. They're so different, and you know
Mhm.
it, like, right away. Now, I would say that one thing that Jamie Reed talks about, and that I think is absolutely true, that there are kids that won't fit into some of these profiles, where you'll have a more effeminate boy or a more masculine little girl. And that does not mean that they were born in the wrong body. It just means that there is variety in temperament and preferences among little kids. While there's a norm, there are also kids that are different,
Mhm.
and we should be embracing those differences, and uh, not, I think, going backwards and then saying, "Well, a boy that is a little more effeminate and has more of those traits, uh, the empathy or that of a typical female, that doesn't mean that he is a female. It just
Mhm.
means that there's some differences in temperament." So
Right.
scientifically, how
Right, yeah. That's something huge, is that both in children and adults, when it comes to both sexes, there are a a myriad of average differences on the population level, where you can say that the average boy, does this and this, or the average girl is like this and this. But of course, that's an average. And so on the extremes, you can have atypical traits where, let's say, a boy's interest might overlap with the average girl's interest because of that atypicality, and that's fine. That's part of the normal variation of human development and sex differences. But what the trans activists do is they conflate the interests and behaviors that are atypical with, like, sex itself. So they're ironically actually reinforcing the very
yes.
binary that they're supposedly against, right? Because they're supposedly against, oh, like, we're for free expression of anybody, right?
Mhm.
We support anybody's expression and behavior. It's good to do atypical things, and but in reality, because they're saying that if you have atypical interests as a boy or girl, that means you must be the opposite sex. They're
Yes.
reinforcing the actual a real constructed, socially constructed, arbitrary binary. They're the
Yeah.
ones reinforcing. It's all about projection, the iron law of woke projection. It's always
Yes.
it's always
Dr.
about that. Yeah.
Lindsay, yes.
Exactly.
100% true.
They always do that. Well, they're telling you that, oh, you're reinforcing the binary, you're oppressing people. No, they're reinforcing a socially constructed binary that is not the actual sex binary. So
Yeah. Yeah, I 100% agree.
Mhm.
So let's talk about, we have 10 minutes left. I want to talk about the materials that you provide. First of all, we can say this is what you're talking about, the Sex Development
Mhm.
Handbook. So I think a
Yeah.
lot of what we've discussed, if you're listening and you would like to have this information, you can go to the website, and I'll put that up really, and you could order these materials and you can have them. They're really useful. So
This
I love
handbook
the
is
way you're
basically just
explaining
a
this.
yeah, yeah. It's basically just a guide to one, how our sex develops in the womb and also through puberty. And then also it's a guide to the many different disorders that trans activists often use to claim that sex is not binary. And it goes through in about 25 disorders, lays them out with those diagrams in terms of how they develop in the womb. And then also has a very accessible commentary for a general audience that walks you through the biology of the disorder, walks you through how it's clinically treated in practice and things like that. So it's a very useful guide.
Yeah, this looks great. And you also have for children, you
Mhm.
have these materials. And you and your wife, that's what you'll kind of discuss. But lay out why you created these materials and how they're important and how parents can advocate to have them in their schools.
Yeah, so this one is it all begins with two, and it's a children's book about the two sexes, what the two sexes are, and the function of the two sexes, and then how new life is created. So when a lot of books that talk about sex for children, very a lot of those books are very inappropriate. We looked at the top results on Amazon. They talk all about genitalia. They even show naked bodies and things like that. But this book has none of that. It's completely age appropriate with beautiful illustrations that really foster curiosity about the natural world and about biology and about the function of the two sexes. And it goes through plants and animals and humans and just shows how all of us are male or female and why that's a good thing and why that's a beautiful thing and where we all come from. So it's perfect for children. I'd say 2 to 9, and you can order this through our website, and we're happy to even do bulk discount orders. If you want to order these in bulk, we can uh, talk with you and do discount orders on that. We're also working on further curriculum. So this is basically the beginning of our children's curriculum, that
Here's
book.
here's another one. Please don't feed the
Yes, please
fears.
don't feed the fears. So this is one that is basically focusing on how to understand fear for children and how to befriend it, right? And not let it overtake you. Respect it because it does show you important things about the world. It does protect you, but also make sure that it does not control you. And so that's something that Cynthia illustrated and wrote as well. She's an incredible illustrator. She wrote and illustrated those two books. So
Wow.
yeah, so we will be continuing with our biology curriculum. We will be making interactive curriculum as well. That's one of our goals. So interactive curriculum for children and adults where you can actually interact with the animations by touch,
Wow.
for example, and see the different layers of like the biological systems and things like that. And so that's a big part of what we're going to be working on this year.
That's amazing. And it's really important because well, I mean, all states will have written into statutory law, as far as curriculum, the requirements that must be met, whether you are a private school or public school, and particularly for public schools, and that will include sex education. And in Wisconsin, we actually have in place since 2012. It's very much up to the school district. Other than
Mhm.
they if they choose to provide some sex education, they check that box. Then they have to. There's certain requirements, and they are basically to talk about puberty, to talk about just what the reproduction in a very age appropriate way, and to talk about maybe STDs, pregnancy prevention, and that is more that you get more into the high school range. That's
Mhm.
not a requirement, in elementary or middle school. And so a curriculum that checks those boxes is what a lot of school districts are looking for. What they're provided, oftentimes quote free, is comprehensive sexuality education, which is a pre-K through 12 program that sexualizes kids very young, introduces age inappropriate concepts way too young, and immediately right off the bat starts indoctrinating them into gender ideology and introduces them to all the concepts that we've discussed that are not scientific and that are ideological. And they want to start young because they believe if they wait till kids are in high school, it's too late. So they want to start that indoctrination really young.
It's almost a weird response to uh, traditional arguments of, we can't talk about sex at all ever to any teen or anything. Almost like they're trying to push back against like what they see as like the constricted traditions of the past. And so, but they're going so far where they're actually like sexualizing children, and it's so pleasure focused, so even kink focused, and even porn focused for even elementary and middle schoolers. And they're the ones actually they're grooming children by doing that. It's child abuse. It really is. And we don't need to have a pendulum swing. All we need to do is make sure that any education on male and female and sexual reproduction is age appropriate and it's biology focused. So we don't need to be focusing on how to have sex at all. We don't need to be focusing on like kink at all.
Yes.
We don't not at all, like not even no mention of it. We don't need to be talking about all of that like actual like sexual activity type of stuff. We need to focus on just the biology of our bodies, how our bodies function, important things to know about our bodies that are age appropriate, and understanding, for example, females understanding their menstrual cycle, for males understanding their 24-hour hormone cycle for males, and like all these different things, right? So that's important. So that's what we're focusing on. It's just biology focused,
Yeah,
science
that's great.
focused, not anything in regards to inappropriate, sexual discussion or anything like that. So
Yeah,
that's what it
not
should be.
ideological, not how-tos, but the important information the kids need to learn about their biology.
Mhm.
And then for parents, I like the resources so that if they're made aware, which they should be by their school, that, okay, we're going to be having these conversations, it's sex ed time, the parents can also have resources so that they could have private conversations with their children where maybe some of those more controversial subjects can be broached,
That's the
but
thing.
they're
We want to
done.
defer. Yeah,
Yeah.
we want to defer to parents for actually teaching those more private subjects. When it comes to, we're basically helping arm parents with knowledge, for just knowledge about biology and making it accessible. And then also for children, knowledge about biology, making it accessible. And then when it comes to those discussions that are more private, that's for parents to have.
And I think a lot of teachers would really appreciate the fact that if they're broaching these subjects and someone raises their hand and asks the question, they can say, that's one you need to go home and talk to your parents about.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, that's not for
Exactly.
school. That one you can say for your parents. And if you want, like, I'll write a note and say, we've discussed this and so had some important questions that I think that you should answer, not me.
A
And
lot of teachers now, they're like, "Oh, we're your parents and we'll tell you what to think because your parents are bigots."
yes.
It's like, it's awful. Yeah.
And I think a lot of this curriculum, in deference to a lot of teachers, even more progressive teachers, they not many teachers will have interactions with the sex ed curriculum that will be very specific. So the curriculum is adapted, and they haven't read it. They haven't poured through the thousands of pages, and it is discretionary. Teachers can pick and choose and create a certain environment in their classroom. But there are those activist educators who tend to be the ones that want to teach these classes, and they are going to do it their way. And then we have to deal with social emotional learning, which seeks to integrate comprehensive sexuality education into every subject and kind of force it down the throats of teachers and kids in every classroom, in every subject. And they do this because they know that states allow an opt-out, and because Mahmoud v. Taylor, which was just decided last year by the U.S. Supreme Court, says that every parent should be afforded the ability to opt out, and that's the law. So if you aren't afforded that option, then your school district is violating federal law, and you should talk to an attorney.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, people need to take action, especially legal action, to confront any of that. And I've seen many videos of parents now talking at school boards and really hounding the school board members about the curriculum that they've seen in their children's classes. And it's really good seeing parents stand up for their children. And
Sunlight is the best disinfectant. Even if you're in
yeah,
a blue area, sometimes it's the only thing that you can do.
mhm,
And go viral and let people know, and talk to at local city councils, and just that sunlight will make a change. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's what I've encouraged everybody to do since I've even started this, is just like speak out in any way you can, do anything you can. You don't have to do the same thing that everybody else does. You can do something unique, but just speak out in some way. The more people we have doing that, the easier it will be to take this down. So, and that's what we love doing, is just helping arm people with knowledge. It's why we have produced so many animated videos as well that you can look on our website. If you go to theparadoxinstitute.org/videos, I believe, you can see that we've produced many animated videos that just go through very quickly, about 5 minutes, go through the major biology topics, debunking the common activist arguments. And we provide, one, obviously, the visually powerful, engaging material there, but also you can access all the scientific sources and the transcripts for those animated videos on each of those pages. So it's
far preferable to Amaze videos provided by the Advocates for Youth, which I just watched a new one and it's disgusting. So we'll have to, this hour has flown by, and I'm in follow-up, I'm going to show some of those videos and do a compare and contrast between Amaze videos and your videos. But I'm so grateful to the work that you and your wife are doing at the Paradox Institute, and excited for this new curriculum. And I can tell you that there were a lot of school boards across America and states that will welcome an alternative to the radical curriculum provided by these Marxist, very woke institutions. Educational materials, the institutions that create them, they are completely captured. And it's a struggle to find quality resources that aren't, where this stuff isn't embedded. It's a real struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the power that we bring is visually powerful material that's also accessible. So combining those two things together, and then you have the fact that you can easily access or see where we get our sources from through the scientific papers. So it's just a very powerful combination. It's something that people aren't really doing that in specifically this biology space. So we're happy to be like a breath of fresh air and provide all that ammunition and help that you need.
Well, and then, so we've had that. If you want to learn more, go to this website at theparadoxinstitute.org. And I will put up later your X handle, because I'm a social media manager.
Yep.
Follow on X. You've had some viral moments, and now that Moms for Liberty and I are following you, you do really good work, and you provide really good information for anyone interested in this topic. And I'm definitely going to have you back on again, because there's a lot more that I'd like to talk about.
Yeah, that'd be great. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Well, thank you for joining me on Unleashed, and I look forward to seeing what you unleash very soon. Thanks,
Thank
Zachary.
you.